Hi, this is Dave with woodheatstoves.com, and I thought I'd take a minute to show everybody how to re-gasket a wood stove door. I get a lot of phone calls, a lot of people have confusion out there, so we thought we'd clear it up a little bit. So this is actually a brand new stove. You have to imagine that it's old, and now you've noticed that the fire tends to burn out of control. You're getting air leaks around your door gasketing. So what you want to do is pull the old door gasketing out first, rip. In some cases, the furnace cement that held the old gasketing in place will be very rigid, and other times it'll come right out. Whatever furnace cement is left in the track after you pull the gasket out, you want to use a screwdriver or a little chisel, even hammer it out a little bit if you have to. You want to have as fresh and clean of a metal surface in there as possible. It's even okay to rinse it out with water, but you don't want to use anything that's going to have oils or solvents in it to clean that track out, because this is the type of material you'll be using to re-cement the glue back in. This is furnace cement. Furnace cement is water soluble, so having a wet track in there is better than having a dry and dusty track as far as getting this furnace cement to set up. So once you've taken the old gasket out, you've scraped out all the old furnace cement and cleaned it up, it's time to place the new gasket into the trough. I'll always start by dry fitting the gasketing into the opening and then closing the door and making sure that it fits right. It's really easy to compress this gasketing and make it thicker, or stretch it out and make it thinner. So every door gasket is going to have a little bit of play in it. Some will have more than others. If you glue it in without pre-testing it, you may find that it's too tight right here and you can't close your door. So dry fit the gasket into place. Sometimes a little piece of duct tape or masking tape to hold it in place will be helpful. Once it's in place, you're going to want to close the door over a piece of paper in several different locations. It should not pull out easily. You want to make sure that you have a tight seal. I usually start by testing it close to the handle, and then once over here close to the hinges, just to make sure that your gasket's going to seal up tightly. If your piece of paper rips, you know it's plenty tight enough. Once you've dry fitted the gasket in, assured that it fits well, then you're going to take out your furnace cement, cut a little tip off of the bead here, or cut a little tip off of the tube. You're going to squeeze a nice even bead about 1/4 inch or so into the trough, all the way around. One of the tricks to this stuff is you really have to squeeze it and knead it back and forth, otherwise it tends to separate out in the tubes over time. So you want to make sure it's a fairly even consistency. You'll put your gasketing in place. Typically you'll leave the seam where the two ends of the gasket meet close to the hinge or at the bottom somewhere. So you start at the bottom, you press the gasketing in, making sure that it is stretched or compressed just the same way it was when you did your dry fitting. Once your gasketing is glued into place, you're going to close the door and let it sit for at least 4 or 5 hours. I think the label says you need to let it sit for an hour. I say let it sit for 4 or 5 hours. You always want to make sure once you've glued it in that you do close that door over it. That's going to compress the gasketing into the furnace cement while the furnace cement is still wet and ensure a nice positive connection. So if you have any other questions about gasketing, you can check us out at woodheatstoves.com or send us an email. Thank you very much.
What if I don't have a size that you've got listed, or I don't know what size to put on my stove?
Oh, well, that's a very good question. Typically, the owner's manual for the stove will be your best resource. We have free parts lists and owner's manuals on our website. That can be a little bit tricky. Having to pre-purchase gasketing to dry fit it in there first is tricky. So you're going to need to make sure you can find your owner's manual. Sometimes this is a little tricky, but you can say you don't have an owner's manual or there isn't that reference material. Pulling out the old gasketing and measuring the trough. Say this trough is a 1/2 inch thick. It actually takes a 3/4 inch door gasket. So it's a little tricky if you don't already have an owner's manual.
But it looks like you can adjust the gasket somewhat to expand it or contract it.
So in this case, it has a 1/2 inch trough. 3/4 inch gasketing would be a good place to start if you have a 1/2 inch trough that the gasket sets in. Like I showed you, this is 3/4 inch door gasketing. It can be stretched out to 5/8 or squeezed up to 7/8.